It's good to be catching up again with Ali Cupper, the member for Mildura. How are you going, Ali?
Hey Ricky, I'm good, thank you.
You've caught up with Agriculture Victoria officials about this situation where we need pollination for the almond season this year in the Sunraysia.
Yeah, look, that's right. So really difficult, nerve-wracking times. You certainly don't want a discovery of varroa mite anywhere in the country, but New South Wales is our neighbouring state. We've got so many connections and synergies with New South Wales. And for pollination season, we often rely on movement of hives from New South Wales to Victoria. And if we don't get those hives, if we can't get enough, that can really jeopardise our almond season. And as we know, almonds are a massive contributor to our economy.
And certainly with bees, the pollination is not just underpinning almonds, but a whole lot of other crops. But you've needed to rely in the past on hives that come in from New South Wales. There's been no controversy about that in the past. But Agriculture Victoria have moved to say, well, they can come from Queensland or South Australia, but they're keeping restrictions on New South Wales hives.
Yeah, that's right. So we can get them from other states. We'll still need permits to get them from other states. We can also repatriate. So if there's hives that would usually be used in Victoria, which are I think within 100 kilometres of the river on the New South Wales side, we can bring those over. The permit system. Our farmers are also not opposed to measures to try and keep varroa mite out. They get it too that we need to be really cautious about bringing anything in from New South Wales. One of the concerns though was about if you're going to put a permit system in, how much drama are you going to put us through? Is this going to be an efficient permit system, or are things going to get held up for weeks and weeks in red tape? The key message from the ag people when we spoke to them on a conference call a few days ago with other regional MPs was that those permits will be very, very efficient. They'll be approved within 24 hours, probably same day and even on weekends.
Now, when it comes to New South Wales, though, is Agriculture Victoria saying, look, there is an opening for those hives to come in? I mean, some of them are just across the river from the Sunraysia, as Anne Webster said on our program recently.
That's right. So that's okay if they're just across the river. They'll still need a permit, though. But that's and the permit system is not to make life artificially difficult. It's really just for traceability. So those hives can be repatriated with a permit, but the hives that are anywhere else are subject to a blanket prohibition to be moved into Victoria.
The point you make about traceability is an interesting one. We might move across to talk about foot and mouth disease in a moment, but a New South Wales Ag Minister, Dougal Saunders, did say on our program recently he thought this might have highlighted the case for traceability with regard to hives. We know Victoria's had traceability with sheep and electronic tagging, unlike the rest of the nation until this new decision at the Wednesday Ag Ministers meeting. How valuable is traceability, not just on a biosecurity but other fronts?
Oh, look, I think it's extremely valuable. I mean, whenever you're talking about a virus, a spreadable risk, and it's interesting. I mean, we're talking about foot and mouth or varroa mite, but we've just come out of a global pandemic from COVID. And we know the experience of, the importance of everybody playing their part, about, checking in QR codes, all of those sorts of things, so that if there is a case, we can trace back to where the source is and it helps us to contain the problem. It's in everyone's interest. And I think that the work that we did in Victoria for that electronic tagging is going to become extremely valuable, in giving us peace of mind and confidence that our quarantine systems are working in Victoria. And if they're not, if we have an incursion, hopefully, that electronic tagging, because we can trace where an animal's come from within a day because of electronic tagging, it's going to make it a lot easier for us to get on top of it.
Yeah, on that subject of if we do have an incursion, and to be clear, no one's saying that we have had an incursion of foot and mouth disease at the moment, but the South Australian Agriculture Minister told us yesterday that all the states have agreed that regardless of where an outbreak does happen, if it does happen, all the states will contribute to the cost. That's an example of the Federation working well, isn't it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we at some point, you would like to think in a crisis that we as Australians come together, because we are a country. That was the whole point of 1901. That was the whole reason for it, was because we are stronger together. And I think one of the sad aspects of the pandemic experience that we had with COVID was seeing, states become competitive and shut each other out. And I was always highly critical of that. I thought that proportionality was extremely important, that there were other ways we could have managed COVID between the states without that kind of blanket lockdown on hard state borders, that there was a case for the federal government to come over the top. But look, it's really pleasing to see now states having that sort of cooperative agreement voluntarily. What I would say, though, is that sometimes when it comes to the crunch, and unless you've got that leadership, that overarching leadership, those sorts of agreements, which are nice when everyone's calm, but can certainly change when everyone's in crisis, still need to be monitored, I think. And I'd like to see the federal government, show a willingness to be more involved in those sorts of dynamics between the states, if necessary.
Now, just lastly, back on varroa mite, in your discussions with Agriculture Victoria, you've indicated there is going to be a deployment of additional staff to help in Arimple, I believe?
Yes, that's right. So we're really pleased to see that. So in Arimple, one of our little towns here in Sunraysia, I went to Arimple Secondary College, Ricky, so Arimple's got a special place in my heart. And that's where there's going to be a control centre where, local farmers can be assisted with testing, that they're going to be doing, really thorough surveillance. And that's good to see. We're taking this extremely seriously because, we just know, we know the consequences if we don't. We know that in New Zealand they were, their industry was decimated by varroa mite when it managed to slip through their quarantine defences. And we know, back in 2001 with, in the UK, when foot and mouth disease was an issue, just millions of livestock had to be killed, and it wasn't just their ag industry, it was their tourism industry too. I mean, we're coming off, a two-year, well, we're not out of the pandemic, but look, let's call it the tail end, for want of a better term, where we had, our entire, retail industry and tourism industry shut down. On their knees. The last thing we need now, is a biosecurity disaster that shuts us all down again.
Well, Ali, we all do hope for brighter days ahead. Thank you so much for joining us today talking about those topics.
Thank you very much, Ricky.